The narrative around the mediation, for example, it's very clear Pakistan has its own interest in this. We're not trying to, So I was working with, I'll give you an example. We were talking about the independence. So communication, stratcom, that comes usually after policies to explain or, get acceptance or absorption for the policies. I haven't. So, my dad used to work for PTV in Islamabad.
Welcome back to another episode of Chatroom with Shizza. I want to talk about something rather interesting today. We live in a modern world where countries aren't just run with policies anymore. Nations are brand and leaders are narratives, and public opinion is the infrastructure of all of that. And I have someone with me today here in the chat room who really understands all of that and stands at, or rather operates at the intersection of all of these. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to be in conversation with someone who happens to be a media communication strategist, Dan Qayyum. Hi, Dan. Thank you for joining me and welcome to the chat room with Shizza.
Pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
I know that you're visiting Pakistan in a very short time, so I'm really lucky to get a hold of you. I want to get into deeper conversations also, but what makes you come to Pakistan at this time?
I had a few meetings, and again, we're talking about the narrative control, and we're talking about nation branding. So there's a few things that we're working on at the moment, especially with the government here as well, with some institutions in Pakistan. So it's part of that, basically. Yeah.
And I do want to talk about all of that in detail. But if I were to ask you to introduce yourself, because I did say that you were a media comm strategist, for someone who does not understand that, it's a jargon word. How would you tell people what you do?
So I basically, again, I've been in the Middle East. I focused in the Middle East for about the last 2 decades, working with governments in the Middle East, advising them on communications outside the Middle East. So what that means is we work with leading media houses, leading media platforms around the world. We work with clients in the Middle East, and we marry the two. We advise the entities in the Middle East, the clients that we have, obviously, on how to communicate. Because obviously each audience is different, right? When you're communicating to, let's say, travelers who want to come visit the World Cup from Mexico, want to visit the World Cup in Qatar, then it's a completely different communication strategy. When you're talking to investors in New York, then it's a different strategy, and that's where we come in.
Right. So if I'm understanding it correctly, if you're the ad and communications man, then governments are your clients?
Governments are the clients, governments, and any major brands who want to communicate outside of the region. So I'll give, just to give you some examples, the Saudi Tourism Board was one of the biggest clients, Emirates Airlines, any Middle Eastern brands that were communicating outside. And with Middle East being, what it is, they have a lot of communication that goes outside because a lot of it is dependent on outside investment, on tourism, and stuff like even real estate, for example. A lot of real estate companies, Emaar, Damac, they have very set strategies. They want to build credibility for their brands, and then on the back of that, they sell their properties.
So a lot of it has to do with public opinion.
Absolutely.
Right. Interesting. So let's talk about, of course, the Iran war right now. You did mention it. I want to get into the detail of it. First of all, credits due where it's due. I know you guys have especially seen me talk about it so much. It's kind of a moment of pride whenever I do. Pakistan was so smart to diplomatically perfectly place itself during this situation and also have some wins to its name. So it's not just the effort, but there were some wins also. Is there another round of talks happening? Is Pakistan going to be a part of it? Of course, this is going to be your opinion.
I think Pakistan is part of it, and it's continuing. Even as we speak, it is continuing, and there's a lot of headway that's been made. One interesting statement came out of Trump's camp a couple of days ago when he was saying that there is, every time they speak to Iran, it seems like they didn't speak. A lot of the things that were agreed upon they've gone back. So I think that there are issues that we have with the power struggle within Iran, and coming to terms that are agreeable to everyone in Iran and obviously to the US as well. But, there's headway being made. I think I have a feeling we will have another round in Islamabad. I think that'll be closer to when it's about to be signed, because that's the only place that it could be signed from both sides. But in the meantime, it's just bridging those gaps. And I think Pakistan is the only one playing that role. Obviously, Saudis and the others are involved, but in terms of who the Iranians trust the most, in terms of who the Americans trust the most, there's only one capital.
So do you see the ceasefire being maintained until we finally do
I think the only thing we have to be careful with is obviously Israel playing spoil sport. And, we've seen that. We've seen that multiple times. We've seen that, with even with Pakistan's mediation effort, the CBS story, for example. And we can, everyone can connect the dots and see where some of that is being led from. So we need to be very careful on that front and make sure that, everybody's very, very sort of aware of what's being done in terms of bringing these two sides together. I think we'll get there. I don't see a mass. I don't see us going back to that phase of the war where there was missiles raining down the Middle East. I don't think it's going to go there. But then again, you never know with some of the things especially with how volatile the region is.
So Dan, you started writing only a few months ago, and it's landing pretty well, of course, with the audiences. You also wrote about international law being compromised, states like Israel doing that. So now when you say that we hope we can reach a conclusion in the Iran war, but there's always a possibility of states like Israel acting up. How real is that?
I think it's a very real possibility. Look, Israel has been stretched on multiple fronts. You have Lebanon. You have the Houthis from the Yemen side starting to get active again. Obviously, you have what's happening in Iran. And when a state like that is stretched on multiple fronts, they look for quick victories on at least some of those fronts. And the quickest victory for them would be to take out more sites or more targets in Iran. And thankfully, the US has been able to keep them at bay because of the negotiation process going on. But I think it's a real possibility. Everybody, I think every stakeholder in this is aware of that. And I think we need to be very careful. I think Pakistan needs to be careful, especially with its mediation status being brought under the attention now. I think that's a way that they've found to target Pakistan. So Pakistan needs to be very careful on that front, I think.
Right. And Iran claimed, Al Jazeera reported, Iran claims that approximately $270 billion in losses that, first of all, they asked for compensation. How long do you think is it going to take Iran to be back on track if the war does stop indeed?
I think Iran has taken a lot of damage as well. We don't hear about it. We don't speak about it. Obviously, the economic side, there was a struggle. It has been a struggle for the last many years because of the sanctions. The sanctions being lifted would be a very positive outcome for them. In terms of reparations and getting the money back, I think they'll struggle because I don't see who's willing to pay them because I think some of the Middle Eastern countries are actually asking for damages from Iran. Mm-hmm. So I don't see the US paying those damages to Iran. I think the best they can hope for is having those the money that's been blocked, the Iranian money that's been blocked around the world, and the sanctions being lifted. Mm-hmm. I think that would help. But again, because of the damage they've taken, it'll take some time. It'll take time for them to get back to where they were, and then obviously surpass it.
But coming back to Pakistan's mediation role, Pakistan just branded itself as a peacemaker. I don't know if we deliberately did it. I don't know if we were, if we knew this was happening, but we did. And here we are. What do you make of that?
I think it was good leadership. I think we spotted a gap. And I think there was a real reason behind that. We share a huge border with Iran. We have an active situation with Afghanistan. We have an active situation on the eastern border with India, obviously. And we can't have another war being brought to our borders, especially one that could have had another Israeli-friendly government in Tehran and at our borders. So I think this is what prompted this, plus the economic impact that Pakistan is taking at the moment. This prompted an urgency from the leadership, I think. Again, this is my opinion, but this is how I see it. We have a very real skin in the game, and that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to, because nobody else was taking charge of it, right? If you look at what was happening back in February and March, it was just escalating, and somebody had to step in and say, okay, you know what? We can talk. We have a good relationship with the U.S. Iran, we didn't actually have that good of a. I mean, if you remember what happened in 2024 with the strikes, right? But at least we have a working line to them. At least we had some trust there, especially with the military leadership on both sides of the border. And I think we placed ourselves in a position which helps everyone, which helps the world. And I think if you see the flurry of calls that we were getting from European capitals, from us, far off places as New Zealand, thanking Pakistan for this role,
right.
And thankfully the ceasefire is held. So it's a role that we fell into, but we took charge of it.
Yeah, and Like you did say, we do have a very hostile neighbor. One of them is always at the verge of, spreading false narratives and propaganda, especially against Pakistan. So when a country like Pakistan, because the international standing before this was, we had some names to ourselves, negative ones, also some that we don't like to discuss, also like IMF being associated to us. For us to have this standing and for India to not have this standing, of course, it boils down to, them not taking a step, but they're not taking it really well. Have you had a time to look at the news and narratives coming out of their media about this?
Absolutely. I've been watching it from day one, actually. So this has started obviously, when Pakistan offered to mediate, and there was a lot of noise in India, a lot of derogatory sort of words that they were being used. And you can see the irrelevance that India has landed itself into over the last year or so, starting with Operation Sindoor, however they call it. And I was speaking to someone, and explaining to them, the difference is India's not doing anything different, right? The status changing over the last year, it's not because of India doing anything different. They've continued doing what they've been doing for the last 15 years, which is basically playing to their election cycle. That's what Modi does. That's what the government is geared towards. That's what the whole ecosystem is sort of managed towards, right? So when you look at the media ownership in India, for example, who owns the biggest media houses? It's all people very, very close to the establishment in India. When you look at what's being produced in Bollywood at the moment, I mean, there used to be some decent stuff that used to come from Bollywood, but now it's all one track, and it's been hijacked. And this is basically, I did a piece on this. What I call it is industrial scale brainwashing of their own public, just so they can keep going and voting the same governments, the same sort of players, every election cycle. And because the focus has been on that, they've lost a lot of ground internationally. And they've been losing that ground, but because Pakistan was not stepping up, nobody was noticing. Pakistan was just quiet, doing what Pakistan does. India was, playing to its gallery. But over the last year, what we've seen is Pakistan has just taken center stage. Pakistan has changed direction, started communicating well, started basically to build a narrative of sorts. Obviously, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but at least we're moving in the right direction. The narrative now is the world sees Pakistan as the peacemaker, because this is the complete reversal of what India has been trying for 15 years, trying to isolate Pakistan. When we look now, you've got India, which is basically, who are the allies? Who are the major allies? Israel, you've got Afghanistan and the UAE, and that's it. Pakistan is standing with the rest of the world. So it's a complete reversal, absolutely.
Unfortunately, though, because of our positioning, at the moment we are not at the very nice end of things with Afghanistan also. So hostile neighbors, like I said again. So I just want to understand now, first of all, when did Taliban become so popular with the Western world? I mean, them to be in the government. And then the Western world also now buying Taliban narrative, especially if it's anti-Pakistan. How do you view that?
I think there's a lot of... So basically, if you go back a few years, right? So Pakistan, there was a lot of criticism on Pakistan on how we were managing the Taliban. And what Pakistan had always done is basically looked at its own interests, especially, when we're associated with how the perception of the US has always been in the region as someone who's only here for its own interests and will leave when that's done. So Pakistan has, even in the 80s and 90s, we've had to bear the blowback of what happens in Afghanistan. Yeah. So we have to hedge our bets, and the policy has been to do what's in the right interest for Pakistan. And that's why, there was a lot of criticism on Pakistan on how the Taliban was being managed. And back then, there was a lot of negative press the Taliban used to get. Now, I don't think I still haven't seen, there's a story today about some legal changes that the Taliban have made in terms of removing the legal age of marriage, right, for girls, so, which is unfortunate. So there is still a lot of press that they get. What's happened is, when Pakistan started carrying out action in Afghanistan, that's when we saw a lot of criticism on Pakistan. And again, you can connect the dots on that as well, but there is this narrative gap as well. So when the bombing run happened, when, the one that they claim was a rehab facility, we were, what I saw was a lot of the media picked up the Afghan Taliban statements very, very quickly and just ran with it. And our statements came out a little later. Now, if you compare that with Operation Mark-i-Haq, we were the first to be in front of the media. We were the first to tell the media what was going on. In this situation, it was a little, maybe we didn't think that, the Taliban would be so proactive in pushing out that narrative for the rest of the world. I think that goes to prove the point about narrative building. If you don't take control of the narrative very, very quickly, somebody else does. And that's what's happened a lot of times with regards to the Taliban. I think what needs to be done is to be, they should be, and now I think the change is there, that we're taking them as seriously as we've been taking the other side of the water. And we've been talking to the media. The Pakistani government has been, obviously communicating with journalists, and the narrative that Pakistan, the true narrative is coming out, that these are people who are absolute barbarians. Look at the stuff that's been going on in Afghanistan, especially with women's rights. They haven't been allowing, women to go to school since they've come to power. Women were, with all the faults that the previous government had, at least, we had women in media, women working in hospitals, in various fields. All of that's gone now. A lot of them have left the country. A lot of them are suffering under the rule of the Taliban. So it's something that needs to be communicated better. I think it's improved, but I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done. But again, there will be a lot of bias. So once the narrative is set, I think the world stands with the truth, and people are seeing what's happening in Afghanistan. It's just, somebody needs to lead that.
And thank you for bringing up the gender apartheid ongoing in Afghanistan. This is something that really bothers me on a cellular level, of course. I mean, you have also spoken about it on your Twitter. You're basically removing, first of all, identities, a whole gender from the public space. That is an absolute, fight for power, just where it stems from, really don't understand. But definitely on a larger scale says a lot about the ongoing Taliban government. But I think the takeaway from this, I'm going to take that, like you said, you have to take hold of the narrative very fast. But I think Pakistan took its time with verifying. The thing with Taliban, although, is they're not military fighters, right? They can be categorized under guerrillas. So of course they're in civilian clothing. And that really is a struggle for Pakistani military to sometimes identify or tell apart, or for anyone actually, and for them to use human shields also. And this is not just me saying, Human Rights Watch has reported them using innocent civilians as human shield. Interesting. I want to take you back to, again, the peace talks that were held in Pakistan. You wrote an article that kind of went viral. And there's a lot of layers to it. First being, independent reporting, doing better or landing well with the audience compared to coming from newsroom. And then would you say that you tapped on the emotions at the right time of the audiences? Why do you think that landed so well?
I'm assuming we're talking about the Pakistan identity piece. I think I spotted a gap, and this is a lot of, again, if you talk about why some of the independent writers are leading the reach figures, is because what I've seen, and I've worked with newsrooms as well, the news cycle is very, very fast now. The approval process of the editorial process in legacy newsrooms is much slower. What the independent writers have is time. Right, so on their side, so you can publish, you can spot a gap, you can publish something very quickly, and it lands right in the middle of the news cycle when it's relevant, rather than a few hours later. Timing is everything. So what I spotted with this was there was a lot of attention on Pakistan, and when that happens, and that's rare, we've rarely seen that. When that attention happens, there's no narrative that's the correct narrative gets lost in the translation, right? So you have people coming to Pakistan for the first time and reporting some of the stuff they're seeing in this, there's this. The New York Post journalist who was here, she was talking about she was very surprised. A lot of people were saying they're very surprised that this is Pakistan. And this is what prompted me thinking, we've always known. So there's something we know that the rest of the world doesn't know. How can we communicate it to them in a way that they understand? And that's what the piece was built upon. And, obviously there's enough. You can write a book, easily write a book on the subject.
It was honestly, like reading it, it was like a love letter to Pakistan. It was just beautiful to read. But you did say that you were surprised of the response that it got. Were you not expecting it?
No, I wasn't, to be honest. Look, not to that extent. No, because it's from my point of view, what I'm writing is something that I've always known, that all the Pakistanis already know. So from that point of view, I was like, this is not, it's not groundbreaking. I'm not saying anything new. I think the reason it landed was the way it was being told, I think. The way you tell a story is always more important than the actual matter of the story sometimes. So the way it was told really landed. And I think people needed that at that time. I some of the comments I got really, made me emotional as well. There was people saying that they got goosebumps reading it.
Yeah, it was genuinely a love letter. It was so sweet. But like you said, sorry, I'm cutting you off, and I do want you to continue. But looking back at your work and your tone and how, you like to take things forward, you have studied it. You have an understanding of audience's psychology also, of course. So it's not like you didn't know it wasn't going to land.
So it's basically, look, there's a few things that come into it. And what makes my position a little bit unique is I've worked on both sides. So writing is a passion, but I've worked on the commercial side of it. And when we were talking about narrative building, when you're sitting across the desk from a Ministry of Tourism and you're talking about how to change the perception of a country into something that would inspire people to, book a ticket, fly over, right? Then you need to think about the audience, right? I call it professional empathy, for example, right? Mm-hmm. So you have to put yourself in the head of the audience. So this coupled with the fact that, I've led sales teams and commercial teams. And one of the things we used to do the last few years was we used to train salespeople on spotting within seconds, you can spot what kind, because there's 4 types of brain quadrants, right? Mm-hmm. There's 4 brain quadrants, front, back, left, and right. And each of them receives information and processes completely differently. So, for example, if you're talking to someone who is in a leadership position like a minister, they're not going to have time to be told a story or for small talk. You have to have bullet points, right? Something that they can understand and make a very quick decision. When you're talking to someone in a financial sector, CEO, for example, they need numbers and charts, right? If you're talking to someone in media, a PowerPoint presentation, a video, that explains something better. That's when you can tell a story. People working in hospitality, for example, right? It's a lot, hospitality or healthcare, a lot more about personal connection. So that's where small talk comes in. And, the business talk is a very small part of it. So all of these people receive information differently. And once you start thinking in this way that, what you're communicating has to land, it's not just about what you want to say, it's about how they will process it and accept it. Once you understand that, your writing lands a little bit more, I think.
Mm-hmm. And I think it did. So is it safe to say now you are going to be a full-time writer?
I'm enjoying it. I'm actually working on a book. I'm 90% done on it.
Oh, wow. What is it about?
It's about my own personal journey and about resilience. I've lived in a few different parts of the world. I've met a lot of interesting people. There's a lot of interesting stories, anecdotes, a lot of learnings, lessons. But it's something that includes a lot of Pakistan. Okay. So, yeah, it's going to be very, very interesting.
We were talking about how Pakistan was lucky enough to, at the right time, build a diplomatic standing for itself. It can be attributed to Mark I. Huq last year, or now, of course, the peace talks too, and things all together. What do you make of that? And then also at the same time, RSS chief and the former army chief saying that maybe we should have dialogue with Pakistan.
I think there's been some back-channel diplomacy for the last few months. We've been hearing about it, rumors. But I think there's a realization in India as well. I think, because of the turnaround that Pakistan has, been able to display, there's a realization, but I don't think we should take it beyond what it is. It's just, people who are not in positions to make any agreements. Those are the people talking at the moment. I think it's more like testing the waters. The government retains deniability. Mm-hmm. They're just testing the waters internally as well. And, there's no reason for us to get involved at the moment. When there's something serious from the government, we will see what, again, Pakistan needs to protect its own interests first and foremost. So there will be conditions that they rightly will be put because of a lot of the stuff, a lot of the hostile stuff that's been happening from the Indian side. We can't just get up and say, okay, because you want to talk, we're here. No,
we're here. No.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have to see what works for us. If it's needed, then we should. I personally have, again, growing up around the world, I've met Indian people. I still have amazing friends in India. There's a lot of good people in India. And my belief is, despite the noise we hear from Indian side, I still believe the majority is not what we see on the media. Unfortunately, it's the hate peddler, it's the hate mongers that shout the loudest, and that's what we hear. But at the same time, they're the ones in charge, right? So just because they feel that they want to get on our sit on the table with us, we need to see if it works for us.
So again, Pakistan is on its way to branding itself. How do you view that? Are we in the right direction? If I were to ask you to assist Pakistan with the branding, what is something that you think is missing and you would do?
Okay, I think we're communicating a lot better than we used to. But I think what's missing is the narrative stuff, right? So we talk about we're communicating better, but narrative is not communication. Narrative is more statecraft than communication. I think we need to do a little bit more on that. And with that, I'll give you an example. So imagine if you're a reader sitting in London and you've come across multiple stories over the year talking about Pakistan culture, the music, you've seen, and in media that you trust, right? So if you read The Independent, for example, or if you read The Times, and you're seeing stories about Pakistan, in media that you trust. Now, what happens when you see a negative story talking about how Pakistan's unsafe or the economy is going down? You immediately, that doesn't land, because you've seen you've seen the Pakistan's actual narrative. You've seen with the reality in the media that you trust. And so what we're talking about right now, and what we're doing, is how to fight disinformation and how to react to it, which is great. We need to, but I think we need to get ahead of that. We need to set the narratives globally, what we are, what we're doing, how we function, where the economy is. Things, for example, are stabilizing at the moment, right? There was a very good statement from the Prime Minister talking about we need to be, we're a nuclear power, now we need to be an economic power. And so, again, we need to communicate how we're going to do that. We need to communicate what sort of incentives we're giving to, investors locally, abroad. We need to have a plan on that. And then we need to communicate it effectively to the rest of the world. So the next time there is a story from across the border talking about, negatively about Pakistan, nobody cares. It's not going to land. It's going to be seen as disinformation. Mm-hmm. Right now, what we don't have is that benchmark. It's seen as information because there's no other information to counter it beforehand.
So is that your advice to the government also?
There's very capable people within the government circles. There's some amazing people doing an amazing job. Whoever I speak to, I've said the same thing, and I've had some good meetings in Islamabad on this trip as well. So this is exactly what I'm saying. Yeah, we need to get ahead of the narrative. We need to engage. We need to engage strongly some of the most powerful media brands in the world, and in the region, and have them carry our message to their audiences, because those are the ones who are shaping opinion globally.
Right. So maybe now is the right time for me to ask you, do you have any good news for us from the meeting that you had with the Information Ministry?
Very good.
Or any news?
Very, very good. So
are you able to share it?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's alignment on what we're doing. There is something that we're launching. It's called the company I set up is called Captivate Strategies, and a product we're launching now is called it's Pakistan centric. It's called the Pakistan Playbook. And what that's going to do is it's going to be, again, a podcast/newsletter format, which communicates very niche audiences, which is basically people in policy circles around the world, people in, diplomats, government, anyone who's the aim is to influence the influencers. So, all these people who are shaping narratives, how can we talk to them and feed them the right information? Mm-hmm. So every morning they'll be getting a newsletter saying, these are the top 10 stories today. These are the stories that help them do their job. Whether it's a diplomat sitting in Moscow, where it's a journalist or someone working in a think tank in Washington, anyone who's interested in what's going on in Pakistan, they should be getting the right information on Pakistan, and completely independently. So it's not something that the government, again, the one thing that we want to protect is editorial integrity and independence, because that builds the credibility. And so this is the one project that we're going to be announcing soon. And I've got the first guest. I can't announce that.
You did mention a very interesting thing. You cannot. A lot of reporting, but not and never at the expense of independence, actually, integrity in itself. How often does that happen to you while writing, now that you're a full-time writer?
So I think, look, again, because of having worked with some of the biggest media brands around the world, there's a very strict church and state divide on editorial versus commercial writing, right? So even if you talk about the Wall Street Journal, for example, doing the partnership that we did with Saudi Tourism was handled by the Wall Street Journal's commercial editorial team, not their actual, the newsroom, because it's a paid program. And the audience needs to know that it is a paid program, right? So whatever we communicate, we're not shutting the doors on, partnering with institutions, but we want the readers to know what's a partnership and what's an actual newsroom product. And as long as that separation is maintained, the readers respect the media for it. And the credibility, obviously is maintained.
So I don't know if you remember in the opening, I did say that, nations are now narratives in itself, and governments are working accordingly. We do live in a modern world. Sometimes governments can tend to be very performative. Love Zohran Mamdani, but that's how he won, and love him for that. He just played the cards right. He knew where we are existing. Is that sincere though? Do you think audiences are smart enough to tell if it is performative?
I think it depends on the audience you're communicating with and the aim behind that communication. If you're talking to, for example, investors around the world and you're pushing an investment narrative that Pakistan is a good place to invest, those audiences are very, very educated, and they would look at numbers. They would want to, again, it goes back to how we communicate to each audience.
Okay.
So you can build credibility by the way you communicate. If you're communicating to tourists, you're opening up the northern areas of Pakistan to tourism. For them, it's a different way of communication. It has to be very visual. We have to show them what it looks like. And these people would be, we're talking about frequent travelers, so they know exactly what they're looking for. They will look at, what's the infrastructure like? Am I able to get from A to B easily? Is the internet connections okay? So we have to make sure that we respect the audiences that we speak to, that they are capable, they are understanding, and only then the message lands, because people are intelligent, right? We have to credit them for that. The countries and the governments, the entities that don't take that into account are the ones that suffer from that credibility gap, because people can spot it a mile off. We've got some good examples around our neighborhood as well. Especially with what happens with Bollywood, the entire world knows. But if you ask most of the Indian people who are watching these movies, they actually believe in them, and that's scary. Someone coming out of the cinema thinking, I don't even remember some of the stuff I read about. I haven't watched the Durandar movies, but they actually believe that this is the stuff that's happening, and the Indian intelligence agencies are doing that in Pakistan. It's fiction, but this is what I mean with treating your audience intelligent, with respect, and thinking that these are intelligent people that you're talking to, and your communication has to follow that sort of the format, basically.
Right. And you yourself have also identified this pattern that people that do come as tourists or foreigners over here, their perception changes. They come with the same idea every time. It's dangerous, words, unfortunate words like terrorism related to it, or a failing economy, whatnot. Every time the perception changes. I think we need to work to advertise our tourism better. Where are we lacking? What can we do?
I think we need to make it a national policy. I think Pakistan has some of the most beautiful landscapes in the world. I've worked for 20 years with Dubai tourism, the last few years with Saudi tourism, Qatar. These are countries who've built in the desert, and they've had to build some of that stuff.
And we saw it happen.
Yeah. And we naturally have stuff.
Yeah.
We have some of the amazing, snow-capped peaks in the north. We have beaches around Balochistan. Some of the coastal highways are, we need to build some of that infrastructure. It comes back to, again, the investment side as well, right? So with the focus on the economy, if we can bring in investment to develop the tourism product, at the same time, while communicating to the world what we already have, some of the, like Lahore at Basant, for example.
Yeah.
I was in Lahore during the last one. It's such an amazing experience, and I would love I've already got a list about 8 or 9 friends who are joining me for the next one. So stuff like that needs to be promoted, and at the same time we need to invest or seek investment even from outside into developing the tourism product, and I think it should be national policy. I think that could be one of our biggest biggest sort of revenue drivers from FDI from tourists.
Right. Thank you so much for your time, Dan
Pleasure.
Qayyum. You've been a very good sport, and good luck with your new venture next
Thank
time.
you.
When it has launched and when you have some products out there for the public, then I'll have you back to talk about it.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. I will catch you right here next week in the chat room, which is because conversations never end.